I'm going to throw together a video on pulling the engine out of my wife's old truck. This video isn't about so much about pulling the engine out, it's just doing something in the shop, getting rid of this truck, pulling the engine out for resale as a component. I could probably get more for the engine transmission than I could ever have sold the truck for. So that's what I'm going to be doing. Again, it's not so much about pulling the engine out as methodology of how I did it, why I did it. And sometimes you got to really think outside of the box. Cars aren't like what they used to be, and sometimes you got to think outside of the box. I actually had an issue with this thing, separating the engine and the transmission, and I'll discuss that in the video. But okay, this is the start of the engine tear out on the Chevy pickup truck. As you can see, I've got over on the right hand side next to the toolbox and farther back is the battery, the radiator plastic shroud that goes over the top. I've got it jacked up, and what I'm going to do is just every once in a while shoot a video of it as the progress goes along. Intake tubing removed. Just another shot. Got the grill off, part of the fan shroud, some of the hoses. Keeping working on it. A little more done on it. The lights are out. And more progress. Just more of the truck. Got the cooling coils out of there. Some of them are for oil, some of them for air conditioner, some of them for transmission. But anyway, it's out of there. Probably not much noticeable difference. I've been underneath it working on, I pulled that little pan out that exposes the torque converter. It exposes the torque converter so that I can disconnect the torque converter off of the flywheel. But I'll bring you back. What I'm doing right now is I can't pull it out fully because the exhaust is in the way, so I'm trying to get under there and unloosen those exhaust bolts. But I'll bring you back. Got the computer disconnected. I'm going to be taking it off. I got to pull the wheel off. Driver's side front wheel off, get up underneath that fender skirt and disconnect it so that I can pull that computer unit out of there. The exhaust system, the bolt stripped out on the header, so I'm probably going to get a Sawzall, go down in there, cut that exhaust system out fairly close. That exhaust system goes underneath that access pan for the torque converter, so I have to get that exhaust system moved out of there so that I could get that cover plate off of it and then start undoing the bolts for the torque converter to the flywheel. So I got the engine disconnected, and I'm sorry, the computer part of it disconnected. I had to pull the fuse box apart and take some of the module off of the back of the fuse box. That module just plugs and screws onto the back of the fuse box. So I didn't know that. I kind of thought there would be like disconnect couplings in the wiring harness, but anyways, I had to take that module out. So it all stays with the engine. I've got the computer. Again, I got that taken out, and I've got that over on the workbench or on top of the toolbox. So exhaust system, disconnect the torque converter bolts, probably some miscellaneous tubes here and there, engine mounts, and it should be ready to gang. Probably not a lot visually, but one of the things I had to do is I had to pull the starter off. I pulled that plate for underneath the torque converter off, and you could access the bolts, but you couldn't get the bolts out. So there's always a spot on an engine where you can pull the bolts out without separating the engine and that happened to be the starter. So pulled the starter off and was able to access some bolts and pull them out of the torque converter, pull them out of the flywheel from the torque converter, get the bolts out of there. I got that one exhaust cut off. I've got to get under there, cut the other exhaust off, disconnect the bolts on the bell housing that attach to the engine, and just hook up a chain to the engine hoist onto the engine and disconnect the motor mounts, and it's ready to come out. Okay, here is the engine bay of that Chevy truck, and as you can see, I finally got the engine out. Now let me tell you what the hardest part of taking this engine out was. Getting that transmission and the engine block to separate. We have an aluminum housing on that transmission and a cast iron block that it attached to, and it was a bear to get them things to break apart. We tried everything. We actually ended up taking, I have this long pry bar. It's not really a pry bar as much as it's a long chisel, and I mean long. It's probably 2.5 feet long. I'll show it to you when I get around to, if I can find it laying around here. But the hardest part of the whole project was getting them things to separate. I bet you it took us a good hour of jockeying the transmission and the engine up and down, trying to create like an angled effect on it, raising the transmission, lowering the engine, raise the engine, lower the transmission, to try and get that thing to break apart. We kept thinking that we hadn't gotten all the bolts out, and it was just stuck. I mean, hammered together. And it kind of, afterwards, we researched it online, and other people have said that same thing. Hardest part is getting the block to separate from the transmission housing. So it's out. I'm going to list it, and I'm not really sure about that transmission. I'm going to see if there's any interest in that transmission. If there is, that was nice. If there is, I'll pull it out. You can see up by that one bolt, the one bolt where there was like a chisel mark on that thing, where we actually had to get the thing, a chisel in there and try and separate it. I gotta tell you, that was ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous. You think if they had engineered two dissimilar metals to go together, they would have done something about it. So put some kind of cathodic protection or some kind of protection over there on it, gasket or something, to stop that from happening. But anyways, it's out. I'm going to list it. Probably, I'm again not sure what I'm going to do about that transmission. I think I'm positive we're gonna scrap the truck. So I might pull that transmission out and just set it up on one of the racks and see if I can sell it. If I can't sell it, then I'll scrap that at some point in time. But it's out. That's the end of this.